Night School.
Night School. How you doing?
I'm really good. Really excited to hear about this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of my favorite books of all time. And I'm interested in public speaking. I think it'll be useful for us as podcasters.
Definitely.
I'm super stoked.
Awesome. So you mentioned How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's how we're familiar with Dale Carnegie originally.
Right.
How did that originally come to your attention?
Dad, for sure.
Dad? Okay.
Dad's dad was really into Dale Carnegie. I think he met him. I think
Yeah,
he
he
went
was
and
at
saw him.
seminars. Like Dale Carnegie did a lot of seminars, and he
Yeah.
would go. Our grandpa Ed would go to seminars. So yeah,
Right.
that's how we first became exposed to him. But this book is not just by him; it's also by a guy named Esenwein, who I'm not really familiar with, and I couldn't find a ton of information on him. But he's a guy that was a public speaker who I guess at some point met Dale Carnegie. He was an older guy, and he's written a couple other books kind of on this topic. But the book does feel pretty similar in tone and structure to How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it suffers from kind of the same issues that people bring up with that one, in my experience. That being, I remember when I used to talk about How to Win Friends and Influence People to my buddies at Amazon, and the reaction was often like, this sounds manipulative and like weird. This sounds like a problem, which it has been used by, what was his name? Manson used the technique, was like credited for using the techniques from How to Win Friends and Influence People to influence people to do murders. So that is kind of a problem with this sort of knowledge, is that it can end up being used for bad reasons. Although there is very much the tone through the whole book that they think you need to be speaking honestly and speaking from your heart and speaking of things that you believe in and that you have convictions about. So there is a lot of that peppered through.
If you don't mind an interjection, there's a similar like disclaimer at the beginning of How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was throughout, but at the beginning it made it very clear that if you weren't sincere, they wouldn't work as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it was probably peppered in there too, because I remember that very much being brought up with it. But so that is something that I guess to kind of think about with these sorts of things. Make sure that you're being sincere with what you're saying and that you're not just attempting to be dishonest. And I do believe that is something that people pick up on. They are likely to.
Yeah.
So this book covers a lot of different topics regarding public speaking. The thing that is brought up more than anything throughout the whole book is the necessity for practice. The necessity to, if you're going to become comfortable public speaking, a lot of that is going to be practice, both in terms of getting in front of people and talking. But
that is live.
Yeah, it's on.
Sorry, we just figured out there's a random mic in here that's live. I don't know how to turn it off, though, because I don't see it on GarageBand. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
That'll do.
Evan unplugged it.
So you have to practice. These things can serve as, there's a lot of shortcuts to kind of how to get started and how to better practice and the ways that you should practice, but practice is important. It's not something that you can just get on stage and be comfortable doing, because it's uncomfortable and there's a lot of attention on you, and that's an awkward thing. And there's a lot of insistence about practicing things leading up to it. So I want to start with kind of talking about sort of the things. I've got it kind of separated out, the topics I want to cover. And the first thing I want to cover is the things that he mentions that you need to do to be prepared to public speak, either generally or for a specific thing. So you have to, something he says a lot is that you have to, or I should say they say a lot, they say that you need to study a topic frequently so that you have confidence in it. Meaning like they would frequently mention you need to immerse yourself in this topic. You need to be thinking about this topic. You need to be using your imagination about this topic.
Right.
And when you're practicing about, like, you need to be reading as many books on the topic as you can and becoming very fluent in discussing it. Because that fluency will end up coming into play in ways that you don't necessarily expect while you're speaking. Pronunciation is something that you should practice a lot, and actually broke that up into three different things that I'd never actually thought about, but it broke pronunciation up into three categories. First one being articulation, and that's sort of the main one. That is the way that you say each specific sound and the way that you link them all together. So practicing, there's different sorts of, there are techniques in here about like sort of like lists of sounds that you can go over, or like rhymes that you can say repeatedly that help train your mouth to be basically just better at using those sounds. But practicing articulation, accentuation, which means you could be pronouncing the word correctly and saying the sounds correctly, but you're not putting the emphasis in the right place. And so the
Right.
word doesn't actually sound the way it's supposed to sound.
Mm-hmm.
And the third being enunciation, meaning making sure that you pronounce every sound completely without getting lazy, like dropping the G off of an ing word. So that's,
So what exactly is the difference between articulation and enunciation?
I suppose, enunciation, I did kind of have that same thought with it, because enunciation does feel a little bit like a subset of that, but you're just, it's not that you're pronouncing a sound wrong, it's that you're colloquially dropping part of it off because of an accent or
Oh,
whatever
okay.
reason. So it's
Right.
just when you drop part of it off, not when you say it incorrectly.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And actually, one more question on the subject of emphasis, like where you put the emphasis on what word, or like where in the sentence you put the emphasis. Did it give any tips about that? I noticed that some
Yes.
people like would like da 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 da, like they emphasize everything like it's a question, so you don't really take them seriously. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, and that's kind of not what I'm talking about right here. I will get to that. The idea of putting the emphasis in the proper place within a sentence,
Right.
or like putting where to put emphasis within a sentence.
Right.
But what this is referring to here is just making sure that you're putting emphasis in the correct places in words, because there are correct ways to pronounce words and like correct ways to put the emphasis in it. So it's just referring to within words. Yeah.
Cool.
You should be trying to expand your vocabulary to try and become as competent a talker as you can. Some of the things that it brings up there are, I never really thought about this, but you kind of have two vocabularies. One of them is like words that you are familiar with, and if they were used in context, you would understand them, and you would understand what it means based on what you're pretty sure it means, like what you're almost sure it means, and the context. That's good enough. You can understand it. But you're not the master of that word. You're not able to actually use it in a context because you're not confident enough of
Sure.
the meaning. So if there's words that you hear that you think you know, but you don't quite know, look them up and attempt to use them.
Right.
One thing it mentioned was that they feel that if you use a word 5 times successfully, it's yours forever. So you should be attempting to expand your vocabulary so that you're a more dynamic speaker.
Cool.
You should be trying to find the perfect words for things. So if there's an idea and you can't find a word that quite fits it, you could get out a thesaurus and go through and try to find something that is the word you're trying to say, but with the spin you want to have on it, or with
Right.
whatever little differences you want.
The English language is so thorough that you can search and find a word like, yeah, that's the word that I want with the connotation I want, with like the kind of, some words are more round and some words are more sharp,
Yeah.
like, oh, I got a sharp one that's kind of positive connotation that means what I want.
Yeah.
English language is so open.
And
No, that one's good.
and it definitely changes as well. Like what a word means now is not necessarily what it used to mean, or
Yeah.
what it means in a certain area.
Right.
Yeah. Very complicated. When you practice, it's often going to be a good idea to practice happy, practice in a positive mood. It mentions like reading a lot of like happy poetry. And that goes along with the idea. This was an idea I heard a lot at Amazon when I was doing customer service over the phones. They say that people can hear a smile. Like if you're smiling while you're talking, people can
Right.
tell the difference.
Definitely.
Because like this book made me think a lot about the way that things you don't really think about affect the way your voice sounds.
Yeah.
Your body is the instrument that is making the sound waves. So any difference within the body can end up making a difference in the sound of it, maybe even subconsciously.
For sure.
So practicing happily can make you just sort of a happier talker, and people like that. It brought up the way that people say or when they're talking, and I thought that what they said was a little bit harsh, but like it could be true. And this book, by the way, this book was written in 1915, and it has not been,
Wow.
it hasn't been updated at all. So there's like kind of funny things in it where it assumes Christian faith in the reader, and it refers to cars as autos, and it talks about ox carts and like the relative prices of ox carts. So that stuff's always fun.
Ox carts, as in like wagons for a big animal?
As in, yeah, like wagons that an ox pulls.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, when you said ox, I thought AUX, and then I had to stop.
That's funny. They're so outdated, the animal doesn't even register.
Yeah, no, those animals are over.
The boring animals. But what they say is that if you are saying or then they've described it as your head is empty, like you've run out of the tank of things you can say on the topic, and now you're just kind of struggling, and that's just like the sound that comes out. So they don't really address how do you break that habit. They instead go back further and like you need to break that habit by not being empty-headed at any point. And what
when they mean empty-headed, do they mean like uninspired, no content, nothing flowing in and out? Like that's why you need to read a lot?
Yes, I think uninspired is a good way to put it. And they gave kind of 3 things that you should do in order to make sure that you don't get empty-headed. The first one, it just kind of described the process of thinking. Make sure that you're thinking about things and chaining ideas together. And like it went through the process of like when you have an idea, you ask a question, and then like there's another link in the chain. And you need to like work on that process of thinking and linking chains and coming to new ideas and being able to establish why you believe them based on these other ideas you have. So making an effort to be a thinker. The second one is be around people, pay attention to people, pay attention to the interesting things they say. You can be enriched by the people that you're around. Even if you're just in public and you're taking in kind of the general conversations of people, the more, basically the way they present it is the more input you have and the more interest you take in other people, you'll end up gleaning more than you expect to by just kind of paying attention to the people around you and what they feel and what they think.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some people get empty-headed because they're not really interested or engaged in what's even going on around them. So there's nothing going in to come out.
That's what they're thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's cool.
And the third one being read, which in modern days could be expanded to other things as well with different technologies. But, and they did kind of point out that like when you read things, make sure you read things. And in modern day, let's say watch and listen to things as well that are either educating you or making you think. I think those were the 2 things. They kind of downplayed entertainment. Like that's not really what we're talking about. We're more talking about things that make you think or things that give you information that you didn't already have. And if you take in those things, then you're more likely to be a more, I guess they would say like a more interesting person and more likely to not run out of things to say because you've been taking in so much.
Right.
Yeah. They say that you should, after like learning a lot about the topic that you're going to talk about, that's sort of the thing that they said first. The second thing in like the introductory chapter that it mentioned was you need to be the master of yourself. This is really broad, but they're saying basically like what we're talking about here is being able to present yourself in a way that you want to present yourself, in a way that will influence or lead people or whatever it is that you're trying to do with this. And if you are not the master of yourself inside, you're not going to be able to properly put yourself out and communicate.
Right.
So if you, and it sounds like they're very much talking about like mindset, about like making sure that you like work through your own internal problems. If you have a clear head, you'll be able to more clearly communicate with other people.
Right.
Yeah.
I just heard a little Facebook clip. It said something similar. It said, self-esteem is your reputation with yourself. How much do you trust yourself to do what you want you to do? And that's going to determine your self-esteem. So if you want to be more confident, do a better job of doing what you actually want you to do. You know, like when you have like bad habits, so you betray yourself by continuing to do a bad habit, then you have bad self-esteem because you don't even trust yourself. You don't even know what you're going to do.
In that, like, because I'm not totally sure I'm getting it.
Like, people who are extremely confident people are more confident if they take good care of themselves, if they make make consistent decisions. Like they wake up in the morning and they trust themselves to do what they think they're going to do that day. They trust themselves. They have a good reputation with themselves. So it's like I wake up in the morning and I'll say, you know, I'm going to not eat out today. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to do this and this. And then when I don't do it, I have less confidence because I don't
Right.
believe in my own ability to follow through on my own commitments to my own self.
Right.
And so that just
Yeah, you
results
see your
in
behavior.
yeah. So then I don't present myself as confidently to other people because I don't believe in myself. So I'm not selling myself to you
Yeah, that
because I
makes
don't
sense.
even buy what I'm selling.
Yeah. That's cool.
Kind of similar.
Yeah. They mentioned that you should be careful to use found time. Now, actually, they didn't use that term, but that's just the term that we use nowadays. That's how I wrote it down.
What does that mean?
What I mean by that is like the example they gave is if you want to be a good speech giver, you should be maybe getting copies of good speeches. And when you have 15 minutes because you're waiting on the train, then you can look through that speech and you can like use that time. It's basically saying like use travel time to study to make yourself more prepared as a speaker and more knowledgeable on the topic. So just look for all that time when you can and make sure that you're drilling just in between your day if you get a chance.
Nice.
Yeah. And when you are practicing giving speeches, you should visualize. You should visualize like how you think the crowd will look and how you're going to be presenting because to a certain extent that is a kind of experience. If you visualize that, it's a kind of experience that will make you more comfortable when you're actually doing it because you've seen it in your head already.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what hypnotists do to treat fear of public speaking. They put them under hypnosis and use therapeutic imagery. So they basically say, now picture yourself in that situation you're afraid, but you're not afraid. And so that like resets how they picture it. Because when you're like afraid to do something, you repeatedly picture yourself going out there and shitting yourself.
Yeah.
And so they just try to reset it. Like now powerfully picture yourself going out there and succeeding, and then it's easier.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar.
Yeah, and another thing it mentioned was that if you go out there and you think it's likely that you're going to fail, you've already failed. Like, you don't stand a chance. If you think you're going to fail, it's done.
Right.
You have to believe in yourself if you're going to stand a chance of doing it. And then just a few notes on like the actual sort of content of the speeches in a very general way. They reinforce a lot the idea that it should be short. Like if it's a 10-minute speech, it should be 10 minutes. It certainly shouldn't be 11. 9 is better. It's always better to go under. It's never good to take more of other people's time, either other speakers or just the people in the audience. If there's an expectation, don't ever go over. And if there's fat in your speech, cut it. There's no reason to don't say things you don't have to just for the sake of padding out a speech.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Nice.
And if you get up and you're going to give a speech and you open with apologizing about anything, about how the speech is going to go or what preparation you've done or anything like that, what they say is if you have to apologize, it won't help anyway.
Right.
So if you find yourself in a position where you have to apologize, like
Yes.
you already haven't done a good job up to this point. And if you apologize now, it's only going to make it worse. It can't help you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time I've seen speakers apologize, they're fine anyway. They just want the extra padding, but it doesn't pad because it prepares everybody to see them through a negative lens. Like, oh, so you're one of those people who owes me an apology, so I'm going to just look at you through that lens?
Yeah. I wonder what was the exact phrasing they said, because I liked
But they always... I've never seen somebody say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm unprepared, I'm sick, or whatever, and then actually do bad. No, except for, do you remember when we went to that concert in Tacoma, and was it Modest Mouse was like the lead singer was like sick?
Yeah.
And he was like, sorry, I'm sick, and he was. The apology
Yeah.
worked in that case.
And they didn't do Float On.
They didn't do Float On.
How do you not do Float On at a
They wanted
Modest
because
Mouse
they wanted
concert?
an encore. Hey, sorry, we're sick. We're not sounding good, but we're not playing our only song if you don't ask for an encore. And we didn't ask for an encore.
I thought it was going to happen anyway, but it did not.
No.
The quote was, "Do not apologize. It ought not to be necessary, and if it is, it will not help. Go straight ahead." I think I really liked that one.
That's nice and concise.
Yeah. So a couple things on mindset that they covered in this book, just like things that you should keep in mind while you are given the speech. Make sure that you are focused on the topic itself. Make sure that you are not analyzing in the moment. You should not be paying attention to what you're doing. You shouldn't be paying attention to how you're doing or like that you should be focused on the content itself. You should be focused on the topic. You should be imagining the topic. If you're giving a speech on fly fishing, you should be thinking about fly fishing. You should be thinking about the feeling that fly fishing gives you if you're trying to give a compelling speech about why fly fishing is great.
Mm-hmm.
You should be focused in the topic, and you should try to be completely unself-conscious. Don't be thinking like, oh, I didn't do that right. Oh, am I moving too much? Oh, did I say that wrong? Or what's going on?
Right.
Don't do that. It makes you self-conscious. It makes you worse. They give a lot of credence to the idea that the audience feels what you're feeling and that you act as sort of the leader of the feelings of the crowd.
Right.
And if you are distracted, if you're unfocused, so will they be.
Right.
They're going to get distracted and they can tell that you're not totally here.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this before, but make sure that you believe you're doing a good job. Like, believe that you can succeed in this. And if you've done the preparation, you should have no reason not to believe that you're going to succeed at this.
Yeah.
But you have to believe in yourself if you want to stand any chance of succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
When you're giving a speech, make sure that you are speaking and not thinking about what you're about to say. Like, if your consciousness is moving already forward to like, how am I going to deliver this next sentence? And you're trying to just like autopilot through the sentence that you're saying now, which I think is something I do when I'm like reading aloud or when I'm typing. You end up like moving your consciousness ahead. But when you're trying to say something that you feel, you need to be in the moment and you need to be feeling it now. And if you separate and you're thinking about something else, you can't totally feel it. Next, I want to go over some of the things that they mentioned that were kind of like physical about the body that I didn't necessarily think about. One thing they mentioned was ease, that any sort of tension in your body leads to constriction or leads to some sort of change in your voice that can be noticed. If you sound tense, if you sound like you are uncomfortable, like your heart rate's elevated and like you're on edge, that's going to come through in like a tightened voice or something. It's going to come through in some way. So make sure that when you're speaking, that you're speaking in a comfortable and easy way.
Right.
A lot of what they talk about is just like how important it is to try and emulate the way you would speak naturally. Like when you're talking with people, you should be talking comfortably with people, and you need to get to that same level of comfort talking to your friend as talking to a crowd. And that can totally be done through exposure to it.
Mm-hmm.
Openness of the throat. I've never thought about this before, but when you're just talking, your throat isn't necessarily totally open. And the example they gave is if you go, ah, like you can feel it. You can feel what your throat feels like when it's totally open. And so you should be striving when you're talking to have your throat as open as you can.
Yeah.
Because you'll have the fullest voice that way. They sort of even brought to attention the idea that when your voice sounds full and unconstricted like that, you sound healthier. You sound like a healthier person. You sound physically stronger and more vibrant if your voice is more powerful and you're letting out the proper amount of air that you can let out.
Mm-hmm.
Your voice should be going forward. And what they mean by that, I've never thought about this before either, but you can talk in... I'm trying to do it. Like, you can talk in such a way where your voice is in your throat and you're just doing the vibration in your voice, but you're not really aiming it. But if you choose to, you can have your voice go forward, and it's not just more volume. And they mentioned one thing that you can do to kind of get a sense of whether you are talking forward or whether you're talking inward. And that's there. You should feel a difference in the vibration of the ridge above your top teeth
No way.
That you can feel a difference in vibration there.
If you're talking forward?
If you're talking forward, you can feel more vibration there than if you're talking inward.
Okay, I'm talking inward right now and just kind of letting my voice hang out of my mouth. Now I'm talking more forward and more direct at you. I definitely can't feel the ridges above my upper. What?
Yeah, they were talking about like basically your top gums, is what they were saying.
Did they do a lot of cocaine in that era?
This might have been pre. This is before that.
I think it was like legal.
When I'm really killing it, my gums feel like they're vibrating. Oh.
I don't have a bookmark for this one,
For sure.
but
I'll practice it more later and see
Yeah.
see if I can get what they're pointing out.
they also said besides just having your voice going outward, that you should like literally make sure that you're aiming your instrument at the people.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, what they said specifically is if you're talking to a crowd, you should be talking to the people the farthest back. You should be finding who it is that's the furthest back, and you should be talking towards them, and everybody closer will be fine. But you should be aiming your voice towards those people.
That's a good thought.
And maybe even if you don't totally understand, because I mean, I don't totally understand the mechanism of like, how are you aiming your voice out farther? But maybe just naturally, even if you just think about it that way, it'll help.
Mm-hmm.
The forward voice thing that I was talking about, they also brought up there that is the difference. You know, have you ever heard someone say like your voice carries?
Yep.
Like that a person's voice just carries.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just that. It's about like the way that their instrument aims.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the way that their instrument doesn't just vibrate in their mouth. It's like maybe different people have different shaped mouths even. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason that people's voice carries. But they say that it's something you can train and that it's
That's
something
cool.
that you can like get yourself to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you're speaking, make sure that you are breathing with your diaphragm. So your belly should be going in and out as you're talking. And they say that is going to add more power to your voice if you do that. They also mention that when you're speaking, make sure that you are using the right amount of breath. If you use too much breath, it sounds breathy and it sounds like wasted effort.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't really think of it that way, maybe you do notice it in some way, like, oh, that person's not speaking efficiently. There's just air leaking out of them.
It sounds desperate. Like, please, somebody help.
Yeah. Yeah, and make sure you're using enough as well for it to be a strong enough word. And make sure that you are breathing frequently enough that you don't end up running out of gas by the end of a sentence, so you have to stop in the middle of a word.
Right.
Don't drink cold water while you're in the middle of a speech. That can cause constriction in your throat, and it's going to make your voice weaker or raspier. They had a whole chapter on gesture, and they're pretty negative towards it generally. They think that gesture, at least for gesture's sake, is bad. They say if a gesture is remembered, that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's some sort of course, there's like, if you're doing some sort of specific act out for a bit or something, of course, that's going to be remembered. But they say that gesture should be something that happens naturally. It shouldn't be something that is rehearsed. It shouldn't be something that is done with thought. It should be something that happens naturally as a way to help express your point. And it just seems like an extension of the talking, not like a thing on its own. It's just he said this and this was the way he said it.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone has seen like a TED Talk or something where somebody is like, hello, and very rehearsed, like,
Right, yeah.
hello, I'm here to talk about something that's relevant today.
Yeah.
And it comes off super cheesy. Like
If
used
you
car
notice
salesman.
it's never good if you notice it. It should support the idea you're saying and not distract from it. They mention that your posture, if your posture is better, everything looks better, including your gestures. So just another reason to have
Right.
good posture. It's
Right.
going to look better when you do the gestures. They mention your
I
hands.
gotta correct my posture. I hate it when somebody mentions posture.
They mention your hands and how you should not pay attention to your hands.
Well, then why the fuck are we talking about them?
It's kind of funny. The whole chapter is very much like, hey, the whole gesture, like, don't go too far with the gestures. Like, just let it come naturally. Don't think about it, but definitely don't do it, and make sure your hands aren't weird. But like,
Yeah.
a lot of the times, a lot of the way they explain is they basically want you to like learn about how your performance was afterwards, not to try and analyze it in the middle of it. So in the moment, you should not be thinking about your hands at all. And if afterwards you find that your hands are doing things that are crazy and distracting, you should do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned specifically like nervous hands are something that get people's attention a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm talking and the whole time I'm just kind of like flipping through the book, someone watching might just be like, what is he doing with the book there?
Yeah.
It can be distracting.
Have you ever seen the homunculus? It's an image that shows like so it's a picture of a human body, but I got this from Maps of Meaning. Never skip an episode. So it's a map of the human body, but it shows like where the most nerve endings are.
Is this the Da Vinci one where it's like the man going like this?
No, it's very goofy because
I don't think I've seen it.
the feet are kind of big, the hands are enormous, the face is enormous, the torso is tiny, because it's a map of nerve endings, and so it shows like the relative amount of nerve endings in each place.
Okay.
And like 50% of it is just face and hands, you know.
Right.
And like when you see, if you want to do a crude animation of a person talking, like a really low budget animation of a person talking, cheapest way to do it is just have hands and a face. Like that's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Like Mies.
I was just gonna say.
They're pretty much just faces and hands, and the torsos nobody really cares.
Yeah.
So I think there's like something to like the hands and the face are the articulate stuff, you know, that can get high resolution.
Yeah.
So it does seem important. Like,
yeah. Agreed. And they mention like if you don't know what to do with your hands, just don't worry about them. Gravity will take care of them wherever. If they're resting by your side, it's fine. If they're resting on the pedestal, it's fine.
If you're not thinking about them, nobody else probably is either.
Right. And they noted on posture, I mean, they noted that generally good posture is good posture, and that's going to be beneficial to make you seem more confident and competent and healthy. But posture should also shape itself to the emotion of what you're saying. So if you're giving a speech that's happy, like you should have a happy posture. If you're giving a speech that's sad, like being lower like might make sense. Or if you're giving an angry speech, you're going to like really puff yourself up. So your posture isn't necessarily always just going to be straight up good posture. It can be a useful tool for informing the mood of the speech you're giving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now, there's a lot of things that they went into, including emphasis, that are just ways to make sure that you are avoiding monotony. And they gave a good example here of like if you hear a sound going on, you might not, if the sound is monotonous, like an AC running or the buzz of a light or something like that, you don't notice it until it stops. And when it changes, then you notice it. So they bring up that it's really important to make sure that when you're speaking, you don't get monotonous and that you keep the way you're speaking dynamic and interesting. Otherwise, people can tune out. If the way you're speaking is constantly changing, people are going to be more in tune with it because there's something going on. There's something interesting. And it's like, oh, he's all over the place. What's happening there?
Right. Like they keep getting there's something going on signal in their brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Emphasis was something that they talked about a lot. The importance of making sure that you're putting emphasis in places in your sentence. One, in just sort of in a general way to like make sure that you are making the sentence more interesting by putting emphasis in different places. But also they emphasized the importance of the way that changes the meanings of sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So like, people have probably heard something like this before, but here's a sentence. I intended to buy a house this spring. That implies that I did as opposed to someone else. I intended to buy a house this spring. That implies that you did not end up doing it. I intended to buy a house this spring instead of renting. I intended to buy a house this spring and not an automobile. This is an automobile. I intended to buy a house this spring instead of next spring, or I intended to buy a house this spring instead of in the autumn.
That's a really cool example.
Yeah, so there's different places, like emphasis in a sentence can literally change the whole meaning of the thing, and people tune into that.
Mm-hmm.
You should be changing, your pitch should vary. So the tone, how high or low your voice is. One example they gave is specifically whenever your thought is changing, whenever the direction of your thought is changing, the pitch of your voice should change as well. So like if you're being positive and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but I don't know if that's going to work. Like if you said, I'm really excited about this, but I don't know if it's going to work. I didn't even totally do it there because it's just
you can't do it.
It's such an awkward thing to do, but it's just totally natural that when the direction, when the emotion of your thought changes, the pitch has to change with it. And it's almost like it's hard not to do that.
Yeah.
Your tempo should change, and it should change in a way that is very natural. If you listen to anybody's conversation, they gave an example of like, if you listen to two little kids talking about some game they're playing, they're like the tempo of what they're saying changes based on how excited they are or how interested they are in what's going on or how hard they are having to think at the moment about what they want to do. So the tempo changes, and that happens very naturally in conversation. But when you become over-prepared for a speech, you can end up doing the tempo the same way the whole time because you've memorized it and you know what you're supposed to say.
Yeah.
Where that is not how speech works naturally, and it comes off in a false way to the people listening if you're not changing the pitch, because that perfection sounds weird and is boring. One example that was given is like whenever you remember something, that tempo change happens very naturally. Like that you remember all of a sudden.
You speed up.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and then you start talking faster. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny when you're thinking and talking at the same time, and half your energy is going to thinking and half to talking, so you have to talk half speed. But yeah, I think...
Right. You only have so much processing power.
Right.
You gotta slow down.
Sorry, some of my processing power is on remembering. Yeah, and then...
Exactly. Yeah. Pausing is a very useful thing to do for a few reasons. It can lend power. It gave the example of like if you pause and you're about to say something forceful or something impactful, a lot of times that acts in a way as the same as like, I don't know, it builds up energy, and then you can punch harder with it if you wait a second and you let the tension build up a little bit, and then you drop the really big line that can lend power to what you're saying. They also mentioned that people are like really likely to tune in the same way that all these monotony things do. They're likely to tune back in if they've been zoning out at all. To like, if there's a pause, they're like, oh, the AC stopped? What's going on there? Is there a problem? Yeah. And it adds suspense. So if you're telling a story and people are like not really sure where it's going, pausing for a couple seconds can make people think and like worry for a little little bit.
Yeah.
And that way, when you say it, it's really impactful.
Yeah.
Pausing is also a useful way to let a big idea sink in. So if you said something that's really big and it might take a second to kind of unpack it and totally understand it, letting that rest for a moment and letting people take it in can be a useful way to help get that message across.
That's funny. So you can say something that you really want them to get, and you can pause after you say something you really want them to get to give them a moment to process it, or you can pause right before you say something you really want them to get because you want them to tune back into it and and you want to like a song uses space, like space and then drop.
Totally.
So you can put it before or after something that you really want to get across. That's interesting.
Yeah. It mentions that you should, when using force, it gives a little bit of guidance on using force when you're talking to people, meaning like trying to say something with a lot of passion. And it mentions that like this is the only example I can think of where it mentions that like you might actually want to tense up a little bit because then your voice is gonna like that tension isn't necessarily maybe your clarity is a little lower, but that tension leads to a stronger impact in some way. Because if you're like you can't say something angrily without tensing up.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say something with passion without like having some muscles in you tensed.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives just a few kind of guidance things on choice of words. Plain words are more forceful than words less commonly used. Juggle has more vigor than prestidigitate. Short words are stronger than long words. End has more directness than terminate. Specific words are stronger than general words. Pressman is more definite than printer. It's pretty.
Oh my
It's
god,
pretty dated.
that's so funny.
Yeah. Connotative words, those that suggest more than they say, have more power than ordinary words. She let herself be married expresses more than she married. Epithets, figuratively descriptive words, are more effective than direct names. Go tell that old fox has more punch than go tell that sly fellow. And onomatopoeic I don't know how it's said in that way. Words that convey
There's no way that's a real word. They're tripping.
Onomatopoeia is definitely a real word, but
Right, of course.
onomatopoetic.
No, I believe him, but that's an obscure one.
They're words that convey the sense by the sound, are more powerful than other words. Crash is more effective than cataclysm. So onomatopoeia is just a word that is the sound. Bang, boom, crash, those sorts of things. So that's just some advice on how to choose words that are going to be more forceful if you're trying to use force to convey something.
Right. Can I offer one more thought about pausing?
Mm-hmm.
So something I've noticed about the between amateur rappers and professional rappers, one of the biggest differences is the way that they use space. You notice like new rappers will try to fill up every single line completely with as many syllables as they can, like they get a point for every syllable.
Okay.
Because they're too insecure for there to be space, because when there's space, they have a moment to think. And
I
so,
see.
yeah, when any space happens, they're like, fuck, is this good? So they just try to cram. It's like the difference between like,
Do you think it's like they don't want to give themselves time to think, or they don't want to give the audience time to think about whether this is any good?
I think they don't want to give themselves time to think. Like
Okay.
in the moment, in the 2 seconds between one line and the next line, they're sitting there thinking about whether or not they're adequate, and they're kind of freaking out. So they want to fill it up for that reason. Then they also want to fill it up because they think that like more is better. And you could also think about like the difference between like amateurish and more mature lovemaking. Like a more amateurish lovemaking would be like, I just need to get in there and just cause as much stimulation as I can.
Okay. Yeah.
And more
yeah.
mature lovemaking is like, no, the subtlety is where it's at.
Right.
So like kind of the same thing there with space. But if someone wants an example, Jack Harlow just did an interview on this thing called Chicken Shop Date. It's a really interesting like interview show that's like 20 minutes long, and it's framed like an awkward date. And they have like, it's almost like Justin Frick kind of aesthetic is in the cinematography.
Nice.
Because they'll just randomly cut in an awkward clip of like the dude at the counter just standing there, like while they have their awkward date, or just like the little wheel on top of the building spinning, and then they go back to it. He spits an acapella for her. It's the language is elementary, the words are simple, but the way that he uses space is so effective. He's like talking to her, and he's like, what does he say? Hanging out with somebody else, and I get to thinking that she was you. Any girl can be beautiful. And the space is so natural that when he's sitting in that space looking at you confidently, you know, oh, he's so confident, he can let it breathe for a second, and his confidence fills the space.
Right.
And then he comes back in. So I've never thought about how space applies to public speaking too, but I've really noticed with rap, the guys who really, really know what they're doing use space very wisely. They don't do too much.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then the last thing on sort of the vocal things that they recommend is to make sure you're using emotion appropriately. So we kind of covered this with the body language thing. Make sure your posture matches the mood, but also make sure that your tone matches the mood, and make sure that you are part of making your tone come across naturally and authentically is to try to feel that. Try to feel the emotion that you're wanting to get across. Because if you're not really feeling it, it's probably not coming across correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you feel something, you can act out that feeling 100 ways without even thinking about it. Whereas if you try to think about how to act it out, you might get 5 ways. Like,
sure. Yeah.
It's like a shortcut.
Definitely. And then these are just kind of a few of the suggestions or the sort of general things that you should consider when writing a speech about how you want to influence your audience, different techniques for how you can influence your audience. So definition, meaning this is all just like how to give information to people and the ways that you should think about. So definition, just giving the definition very directly of something, of some piece of information that the audience needs to have in order for this to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Contrast, so putting two things up against each other and explaining the difference between the two of them can be
that's so
useful
effective
for all kinds of things. Giving examples of what you're talking about, like having a few solid examples that are going to appeal to the audience that you're talking about what the point is you're trying to make. I wish I had some examples there. Giving analogies, so explaining something that, you know what an analogy is.
No, is there any way that you could drive the definition of an analogy home? Like, do you have any tools that could help you express?
An analogy is like when you... No, I do not. But
an analogy is like a...
How do we even define analogy?
We just need to use an analogy for an analogy.
Fuck.
So an analogy is like a model of a car that's used to show you what it would look like in a more convenient, direct way.
That's perfect. Yeah.
For example,
classification. So that's sort of a more complicated one, just explaining, like, if you have a set of ideas, explaining how they separate out differently. And if there's two different categories that they fit into, putting those ideas into the categories that they fit into for the people.
Mm-hmm.
Describing something. And that one is very broad, and there was a whole chapter on just the ways that you can describe things, because there's all sorts of ways you can do that if you're trying to influence people. You can the one example it gave is, like, you can describe a gun as a metal instrument that fires bullets, or you can describe it as a killing machine that allows for the efficient elimination of life.
Right.
Like,
right.
you can describe it, and you can put whatever spin on things you want. Narration. So if you're telling a story, you can interject what information the audience should have that the people in the story do not have at this point. And there's lots of other things you can do with narration as well, but that's the big one that comes to mind.
That's really hard to do well. It's so hard not to get in the weeds when you try to narrate a story while you're telling it.
Yeah, if you're doing that, you should plan out what it is where it is you're going to put those interjections.
Right.
Anecdotes. So telling a story that illustrates a point that you're trying to make. And they point out that should be as short as possible. If the anecdote should be as short as it can be in order to still get the point that you're trying to get to across. Because I know oftentimes I've started telling an anecdote to, like, try and support the point that I'm trying to make. We'll be talking about something. I'll be like, oh, that's like in Lord of the Rings. So Gollum said, and then, like, I tell the story. But a lot of times you can end up giving way more information that you need to like end up giving context that you don't need to give. So look at your anecdote before you tell it and see where the fat is and cut that out and say just the parts that you need to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were, like, trying to dive as deep as you could, and there'd be a certain point where you realized, if I don't turn around right now, I'm just going to drown down here. There's a feeling like that when you're trying to take a quick detour in a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And you get this sense in the back of your head. You go, And if I go any further on this fucking what do you call it? Rabbit trail?
Yeah.
Like I'm never gonna get back. I'm gonna
gonna
lose
lose
the
'em.
whole. Yeah, the whole first half of the narrative I already gave him is gonna be gone.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have to turn back now.
I definitely know that feeling. Yeah. You can bring up a point and argue the point. So put this idea out and argue with it. Give the arguments for it or against it. You can essentially use this to support an idea if the idea is going to hold up to the arguments that you're going to make against it. If you know that it's going to be able to survive it, then you can toughen up that idea. Or if you don't like that idea and you want people to not believe that idea, you should attack it in a way that you know it's not going to be able to withstand. Appeal to people's what you believe their ethical ideals to be. Appeal to that, and God, this sounds so manipulative. But like
I know. I was just thinking that too.
it's not. That doesn't sound good. That sounds really like pretend you care about the things that they think are important.
But I think like we learned from Jonathan Haidt that people have moral preferences just like people have flavor preferences, and there's a certain set of moral values that people use to piece together their moral framework. And if you understand that, if I wanted to, let's say I was tutoring a kid and I wanted to teach them math, but they didn't give a shit about math, but they wanted to be a rapper, and I rapped the math for them. You know, that's what it's like when you want to explain to somebody. Like, let's say you want to explain to somebody why COVID was like partially a power grab by rich people, but they're more left leaning and you don't want to sound conspiratorial. So instead, you talk about the wealthy pharmaceutical industry taking advantage of small businesses.
Right.
You're trying to tell them something true, but you're like, I need to frame this in a way that they would connect with.
Right.
It's not, it's manipulative because you're trying to get them to get something, but it's really a matter of linguistics. Like, people have moral preferences, people have linguistic preferences, you know.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, some people like truth more than compassion. Some people it's like, whatever.
Yeah. And it certainly matters where your intentions are. If your intentions are to trick them, then no good.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
if you're trying to sell them a car, then leave their morals alone and just explain the fucking car and let them make their own choice. But
yeah. But if you're saying something that is a real conviction that you have, if you really believe that, you should try and make the argument that appeals to people.
You should.
So long as it's true.
You should.
Yeah.
And they should try to explain their perspective in a way that appeals to you. Because if you're both doing that to each other, then you're going to have a good conversation.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. You should show emotion about what they are emotional about. So if
oh God,
yeah,
we're really going downhill here, aren't we?
Yeah, I don't even want to do the last one, because the last one is just about suggestion, about like how you should suggest things to the crowd, and it says like here's some of the things that'll allow suggestion to work better. People tend to respect authority, and if you're on the stage, you have authority.
Yeah.
You should say, like, if I wanted to convince someone that, like, I guess this is like kind of a good way to use this, but if I wanted to convince someone of something that I truly believe, which is that aliens have visited Earth, I might say, the Air Force has acknowledged videos of unidentified flying objects over the Pacific, and just lean on their authority and be like, even the experts say it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a tip they made about suggestion, to leverage authority for suggestion.
Yeah, to like point to the fact that the authority on the topic agrees with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It said that people tend to follow the path of least resistance, and if like what you're saying is the most comfortable thing for them to believe, then they are more likely to believe it. This chapter was about like mobs. I think the title had mob in it, and about like how to influence a mob. You should be confident. People respect the confidence. They're more likely to follow your suggestion if you're confident.
Some of this stuff is a little bit hypnotic. So like if
It
you're
did mention hypnotism a couple times.
Oh,
and that,
really?
like the way that like it even mentioned that like in a way the person leading it is in a hypnotic state. The person in charge of a crowd is in some sort of hypnotic state. But sorry, you go on.
Well, oh no, I'm interested. What else did they say about hypnosis?
It was just mentioned a few different times that like this is like how hypnosis works.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that the person leading it would be hypnotized. Like we have
Maybe
techniques.
I misread that because I don't have that chapter pulled up.
They probably weren't experts on hypnosis, but
That is true.
But
this is 1915.
yeah, I don't. Yeah, hypnosis was not where it's at now at that
Sure.
point. It wasn't normal. It was
Yeah.
like a weird fringe thing. It wasn't tangled up in the medical community. There wasn't certifications for it. But when it comes to authority and suggestibility, that's a lot of what hypnosis is. Like you can more easily hypnotize somebody if you're in a suit.
Okay.
Because they feel more comfortable following your lead. Also, medical doctors often, not often, but a big chunk of hypnotists are medical doctors. Part of the reason is that since they're doctors, people are more likely to follow their lead. So like, oh, it's a doctor.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And something interesting about like, I feel like they have this approach where it's like, here's how to convince a crowd of something, and that is partially because they were in a Judeo-Christian culture, which is like when you go to church, they're trying to move you to accept what they're saying. They're trying to get you suggestible. They're trying to convince
Yeah.
you of something. They're trying to lead you in a certain direction because they're confident that they're leading you in a good direction.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Eastern approach to organized religion is as, how'd you say, coaxing? Or what am I trying to say? Coercing.
Yeah.
Coercing. Like,
yeah.
hey, we like that they employ whatever emotional and intellectual tools they have to try to convince you of something because they're so sure that it's true. They just like, we just need to cram it down their throats. And so they were living in that context. And so they thought of that as like a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's noble.
Yeah. And I don't think it is. I think it is in a hypnotherapy setting when someone says, hi, I'd like you to manipulate me into believing the following.
Sure.
And then you sign up and you go, okay, now I'm going to do it. Are you
Yeah.
ready? The trick is coming.
Yeah.
Here it is. You're hypnotized. And they ask for it. But I mean, to just try to do that for something that you think is true to someone else, I do think is unethical.
Yeah.
I don't think they understood exactly that. But something interesting about the stage is if I were to hypnotize you, part of the process of inducing you would be to have you look up. It's a neurological thing. You're more suggestible when you look up. And so if you walk into a church, all the iconography is up. You're supposed to look up and gaze at it. And that induces a trance state.
Interesting. Huh. Do you think that's like why churches so often have high ceilings? Is like because of some sort of understanding of that?
For sure. But I think a better way to think about it would be because our neurological functions adapt with our rituals. You know what I mean? So I don't think that it's necessarily that the church discovered that people are more suggestible when they look up. I think it was more just like it's natural that important things go high and you're supposed to look up at them, and that's part of the reason that we do react that way neurologically.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that just because that's just, I think they kind of influenced each other.
Yeah.
Why is that our neurological structure? Why is that our sociological structure? Like, well, because they evolved together and they play off each other.
There could also be even like natural selection involved in it as well. Like churches that have higher ceilings tend to do better. So then they tend to make more churches that have higher ceilings.
Right,
Could
for
go
sure.
that way.
And I think it was like as far as Christian churches are concerned, they were modeled after more governmental royalty buildings. Like when there was first, this would be like year 300 something, when they started building temples for Christianity. They were like they kind of looked like political government buildings. Like that was their, like, we want to make a place that just screams authority. And so it's kind of modeled after the way that the government does things. I feel like there was something else I was going to say. But yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
But that's interesting. The church is like pretty much designed to hypnotize people into believing a set of beliefs, and if the people feel that that makes their life better, they continue to submit themselves voluntarily to that programming.
Sure.
But a part of the reason I'm studying hypnosis is to make sure that when I do public speaking, I don't hypnotize people. I perform music, I want to hypnotize you, make you feel something. As a
Yeah.
speaker, I want to keep the power in your hands at all times. I don't want to accidentally hypnotize you because for the sake of pride, I want to be convincing and I want everyone's attention.
Totally.
Like I want to keep everybody in their own shoes.
Right.
Um,
And you want people to be able to, when you play a song for somebody and you want them to feel something, you don't care if they can articulate what they felt or why. You want them to feel.
Yeah.
But if you're giving a speech, you want them to be able to articulate why they came out of it believing
right.
what they do
Exactly.
and what it is exactly.
Yeah, because a lot of people who've been going to church for years and years can't really articulate to an outsider why they go to church or what
Sure.
it is. They know they feel better when they do it,
Yeah.
and they probably do. You know, it's probably a net good for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you want to keep people thinking independently and freely. Like, I don't feel hypnotized by speakers like Peterson who are like, I'm trying to show you guys how to think so that you
Yeah.
can do it for yourself.
Yeah.
I don't feel hypnotized. But if you mean like an Obama or a Trump or a Hitler, like they are hypnotic. I know that's a weird collection of people, but they're all intentionally hypnotic. Like
Yeah.
I don't remember where I heard it. That Obama studied hypnotic techniques, and he was one of like Obama and Trump are like the great political speakers of our generation, and they
Very
both
different
like
styles, but both widely regarded as very good at it. Yeah.
and they're both hypnotic. They don't necessarily want you to like think independently while you're listening. They're like, follow me.
Certainly not. Yeah.
Follow me.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one more thing here I wanted to note. He talked about sort of the 4 different methods as he views it of giving a public speech. The first one being writing it down literally and reading it off. And he said there's only 4 possible reasons someone would do that, and only one of them is acceptable. That either they're too lazy to try and do a good job on this and they just want to write it out. They have bad memory and they think that there's no chance they'd be able to do it without that. They don't have enough time, which I suppose that is possibly a good one. They don't have enough time to actually memorize a speech or prepare properly. Or because it's so important that any missing words would be a problem because they want to say exactly what they're saying.
Like in a political speech where you have to have your
Sure.
shit together. You have to touch every point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one's just being memorizing that speech and just saying it as it is exactly. Having notes to refer to so that you can touch base with it and then keep talking. But they do say that they strongly believe that if you can talk without notes and you can be prepared and just able to give the whole thing without any sort of notes, that's going to be way more impressive to the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a lucid grasp on it to do that.
Totally. Yeah. So that was everything I wanted to go over with the book. Do you have any questions or comments or anything?
Did you have any? Is there an aha moment that stands out to you as a podcaster specifically from the book?
Yeah, I would say there was the few physical things that it mentioned. I was really interested in the idea of having an open throat and making sure that you feel at ease when you're talking. I never really think about that much, about the fact that your physicality affects the way that you're speaking, affects the way that you're communicating.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
That is cool because speaking feels like just thinking out loud. It feels like a mental process, but it is physical.
Yeah,
and I've been
you're using an instrument to play the thing,
right.
Play what it is you're trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
The amount of air, the shape of your throat, everything is going to play into it.
Yeah. So I thought those things were really interesting because I just didn't expect it to go there at all. To
me neither.
physicality.
Me
I
neither.
just thought it would be a lot more. There wasn't even a ton of discussion of like structure, of like how you should structure a speech and like how you should begin and how you should conclude. There's very little of that. I thought that was interesting.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a cool vocal exercise, And I like vocal exercises not just to prepare to like sing and rap, but also to prepare to speak, because like sometimes I do vocal exercises on my way to work, because then when someone says hi to me, I'm like, good morning, instead of like when you've just woken up. And like the one time we had the meeting at the at that other podcast studio, we walked in and the guys were in there, and I walked in and just I hadn't spoken that day. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, it's an embarrassing moment for me, so obviously only I remembered it.
Sure.
But like I feel powerful when I work out my voice.
Oh yeah.
And then someone says good morning to me, and I'm like, good morning, instead of being like, oh, good morning.
Yeah.
And it just makes me feel it's like vocal posture, like confident vocal posture.
It's good to have like your voice ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure your voice is warmed up, and at any point you're ready to talk.
Yeah.
Ready to say something.
And the vibration feels good too. There's
Sure. Yeah.
like this is a really weird detour, but if you do the there's an institute called the Monroe Institute that specializes in I'm sorry. Sorry, man. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
There's an institute called the Monroe Institute in Virginia that specializes in teaching people how to astral
Virginia,
project.
where's that?
And Virginia's on the east coast of the United States, which is the middle country of North America.
Okay. Where are the un-United States?
And they are out in the middle of the ocean.
Perfect.
But one of them's connected to Canada.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because Trudeau is going to just lock things down. No, but they do an exercise called resonant tuning in their like introductory meditation. It's like guided meditation exercises. They do a thing called resonant tuning.
Mm-hmm.
They play a frequency and you're supposed to hum with it. And it does put you in an incredibly relaxed and pleasant state.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about like humming a certain frequency that just makes your whole body feel good. And so when I do the vocal exercises in the morning, it's partially like fill my body with a strong frequency and partially like make my voice feel prepared.
That's cool.
But
Yeah, I like that.
my favorite vocal exercise is just speak and then drag out a note long so you're in your speaking voice and you're exercising your speaking voice specifically. And then when you find that, I watched this on YouTube. That first you go all the way up and down, and then all the way up and down, and then in the middle in your normal speaking voice, and something about alternating between the the and the feels like you exercise your voice here, and then here, and then here, and then the whole thing like opens up, and it feels like way fuller. And I learned that between I did like 2 concerts last year, and the first one didn't go well, and the second one did. And I did like a bunch of practicing and research between them, and that was like the main game changer of like, oh, I know how to use my voice. I have to find my speaking voice, and then I have to exercise and expand it, and then I can sing from there comfortably. So
cool. That actually reminded me of something that I didn't cover because I didn't understand it well enough to cover it, but I think you've kind of helped me with it. It mentioned that you should understand the role that your nose plays in the bell tones of your voice. So it says like don't speak nasally through your nose, but there is very naturally a part of sound that is going to come through your nose.
Yeah.
And one example it gave is like it was like say this word that ends in ing.
Exactly.
But
the
do the on that to focus on the way that your nose makes a sound.
Right.
So it kind of what you were just doing right now, it seemed like you were doing through your mouth, through both, through just your nose. Is kind of what it seemed like.
It was something like one of them was the nose and one of them was the back of the throat. I can't quite remember. But another exercise you can do if you want to find your most natural speaking voice that's going to sound the strongest is so do the NG first, and you can feel that it's like right, it's like up here, and then see if you can move it down until it's below the back of your throat. Like if you do like a U H H H, you can feel it down here. Then you can feel, oh, I can actually feel the attention moving up my throat. Then find the one that's just directly behind your mouth. Till it feels like it's coming, so that it's a straight line from the back of your throat through your mouth.
You want me to do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm getting it right.
Well, yeah, at first you'll start down here. And your voice will break a bunch of times between here and here. It won't have a continuity of being. It'll try to pause between, and you'll be like coming down here, and then it'll go, and it'll skip. But then eventually you can just do it all the way up and down, and then you can just dial it in so that it's directly behind your mouth. And I think that's part of what it means to speak forward, is that the resonance is at the same height as, like, right here between your teeth, like the center of your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You want the resonance to be directly level horizontally, right behind that.
Yeah, it's probably similar.
Yeah, hello, I'm talking directly to you. Whereas if I'm nasally, it's kind of pointed down. Or if I'm up here, I'm just kind of fucking throwing it up over your head. But this is right at you, because it's like your vocals like shoot up your throat. And you know how, like, if I had a mirror, right, and I was shining a light at it, and I could like go like this, like where I adjusted it so it pointed right at you.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's like. Like the vocals are moving up your throat, and then what direction are they reflecting? But it's determined by where in your esophagus it's resonating. So that got convoluted, but you know what I mean.
That's okay. It was fun.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. And there's lots of cool sort of vocal exercises in here, as like there's a ton of, okay, now read this passage, but with this sort of emphasis on these words. And there's a ton of really cool things in here. If somebody wanted to, like, I could have spent months on this book if I wanted to. I could have like gone through and
do all the drills and shit.
Yeah, it's a class, really. So if you're interested in public speaking, there's also a lot of really cool practice in there that would make you, I just can't imagine you could do all the things in this book and not come out of it like really good at public speaking. With
That's awesome.
All the questions and exercises and all the ways that it makes you think. It's a cool book. Yeah.
Would you, if someone was going to read one book about public speaking, would you recommend this book, even though it's old and a little hokey pokey? Or would you tell someone, probably just find like the most popular new book on public speaking?
I would say, I mean, I read one book on it and I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
But I would not, I suppose I wouldn't really strongly, I would recommend it with the caveat that this is all I know.
Right, for sure. But so good enough that you recommend it.
Yeah,
it was, you're like, it's kind of really old and outdated. Like, it's still relevant.
Yeah, the outdated stuff is kind of not that important. Like, there's certain technologies that they're not aware of, and culture is a little bit different than it was when they wrote it. But no, I mean, it's still mostly the same thing. Public speaking has been primarily the same thing forever. Yeah. So I don't think the fact that it's dated is that big a deal.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Night school.
Night school.